Hello and welcome back to the Argyle CX UX Leadership Forum. My name is Vicki Lynn Brunskill with Argyle. It's great to have everyone joining us today. Just a couple of notes before I turn things over to our esteemed speaker. To ask questions throughout the session, you simply type into the Q&A chat and we will address those questions at the end of the session. And we do want to hear from you. And now, without further delay, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Drew Hawkins, Director of Digital Marketing at Womble Bond Dickinson LLP. We are so excited to have Drew with us for his keynote presentation titled Improving by Subtracting, Simplifying Your CX UX. Welcome, Drew. Over to you.
Thank you so much. And thanks for having me. As it was said, today we're talking about improving by subtracting. So we're going to talk about how doing a little bit less could actually lead to more engagement, more revenue, and how you don't have to do everything under the sun to make a positive impact. A little bit of background about me, as was stated a second ago. I'm currently the Director of Digital Marketing at Womble Bond Dickinson. That is definitely not a company name. You can say 3 times fast very well. I bring 15 years of marketing experience. I've worked on the agency side. I've worked on the client side. Last 8 years have been very centered on professional services, on consulting and legal services. And I've experienced leading social media, PR, crisis comms, web design, advertising, marketing ops, CRM. So I've done a little bit of everything, and I've worked with a whole bunch of different types of clients. And then one thing I couldn't kick from my agency days is the old NASCAR slide. So here we are. If you're looking for a common thread between all these brands that I've had a chance to work with throughout my career, you're not going to find one because there's just not one. I've had a very random career, but it's been very fulfilling, and I've been able to see and learn a lot. Sometimes the easy way, sometimes the hard way, but hopefully some of that will, some of my experience here, you guys can learn from today. So the one key message throughout all of this, if you get nothing else out of today, whether you're looking at UX from the front end UX, or even behind the scenes when you're looking at data hygiene, your CRM, how the back of the office interacts with your business, less is more. You don't need to do everything under the sun. From a marketing perspective, so when we talk about UX and CX, that could be defined a lot of different ways depending on who you're talking to. I was on a panel a couple of hours ago, and that was one thing one of the other panelists said. It's a definition that can be a little fuzzy and just mean a lot of different things to a lot of people. For the purposes of today, I'm going to be looking at this through a marketing lens. So every day, great stock photo of Times Square, and we're going to talk about the proliferation of marketing messages and ads. We have enough messages to look at every day. We've got, based on my really quick Google search, about 10,000 marketing messages per day that we're exposed to. So you've got 10,000 different opportunities where a marketer like myself, like yourself, is trying to get a customer to do something, take an action, consider buying a product. That is a lot. That's very, very overwhelming for an end user. That is just a lot to take in. It's exhausting. So what we want to do as marketers, as brands, we want to make it easy for people to engage with us. We want them to engage with us, but we want to do it in a way that's going to reduce that burden, reduce that cognitive load to get them to do the thing that we want them to do, whether it's buy something, click something, do something, sign up, donate to your nonprofit, whatever that is. We want to make that process as easy as possible. One trap that I think it's easy to fall into is having a lot to offer. So as I see here in the slide, you guys are capable of reading, but even if we have a lot to offer, showing everything we can do for a customer all at once does not serve them, and it doesn't serve your brand. It doesn't serve them because it's giving them way more information to consider than they may be willing to take on. And if that's the case, they're going to mentally tap out. So you as a brand marketer, whatever your role is within CX or UX, if they're tapping out, that doesn't serve you either. I work at a big law firm, Womble. We are about, several hundred lawyers within our firm. We're global. We have, 200-300 equity partners. It's massive. So alongside that, we have within our practice areas, practice groups, and I'll talk about this later. We have 100+ different practice groups. And one of the things you want to, it's easy to lean into when you're an organization our size is, we got to tell everybody everything that we do. They don't know that we can do these 10 other things in addition to this high level service. They don't know that we offer, they want to show off the breadth of what you can do or the depth of what you can know all at once, thinking, hey, this is our competitive advantage. Here are the 50 things that we can do that our competitors don't. And then also, it's what's interesting is you may want to show people all this information really, really quickly because their time is valuable, because you only have their attention for a short amount of time. You're trying to make the most of it. And counterintuitively, that's not always the way to go. Even think about it from a personal perspective, right? If you are interviewing for a job, for example, you're not going to walk in the room and spill out your entire life story. You're going to start at the high points that are meaningful to the person across from you, your audience. And then as they get more interested, then you start to unpack those details as they show interest. And UX and CX work pretty much the same way from a brand perspective. One thing to remember is your brand is not the Cheesecake Factory. If you do work for the Cheesecake Factory and you're on this call, bless you, this doesn't apply to you. But one thing, if you've ever been, they're very famous for their menus. The menus are novels. They're huge. There's a million things on there. Another thing that I've noticed whenever I go to a Cheesecake Factory is there's always like a 1 hour and a half, 2 hour, 3 hour wait. And I think a big part of that is you go sit down, you open this menu, and unless you go a lot, I don't, but unless you're a regular there, it's really hard to pick out what you want because there's so many options. And how do you know if you pick the right one? Are you missing out on something else? So that cognitive load takes more time for people to decide what they want. And therefore, now you have a backlog of customers, which kind of works for the Cheesecake Factory, but this does not necessarily work for everybody else. One law from a UX perspective that's kind of popular is Hicks' law. So if you've heard this, I apologize. If not, here you go. So what Hicks' law states is that the time it takes to make a decision increases with the number and complexity of choices. So the more choices or the more information you present someone, the longer it's going to take them to make that decision. And just think about your own user behavior on your phone, online. Think about your kids' behavior if you have them. There's not a lot of patience to have to sift through information. There's a reason that there's apps called Blinkist, or that there's like little highlight reels, or that TikTok is a big deal, right? We want to consume a lot quickly. If we are making that information gathering phase take longer, take more effort, people are going to check out and go to the next thing. More often than not, the brands that win aren't the ones that are going to offer the big breadth of choices or the depth of choices. They're going to be the ones that just make it straight up easier to buy from. And so that's something really important to remember and to take forward through the rest of this conversation. So less is more. I've said this again, but I'll reiterate it. Fewer options it's not just an aesthetic choice. It's not a design choice to do less. Fewer options can have meaningful business results. They can have more engagement, meaning people are staying on your site longer. They're doing more activities. They're completing forms, whatever you need them to do. You have more customers, and with more customers, you can have more revenue. So what does this look like in the real world? It sounds nice to talk about this at a high level, sit up in my little perch and say, here's what I think. Let's see how this is actually played out in the real world. So a couple of case studies to walk through. One is with Vanguard. So this is a study that there's a really good Stanford research paper, and I'll refer to two of the research studies they did within this paper. This was one of them. It was Stanford and somebody else from Columbia. I didn't note that here. But Vanguard gave these researchers access to the 401k retirement plan records of 750,000 people at 2,000 different companies. That jumped out at me just at the actual trust level that Vanguard had with these researchers. They want to analyze, how are they picking funds? Did they not pick funds? What does this look like? One of their key findings in this middle point is that for every 10 mutual funds an employer offered, the rate of participation decreased by 2%. That means if a company only offered 5 funds, they had 10% more employees participate than if they offered 50. So if they were to go through and survey the employees and say, hey, we have 2 plans. Would you rather have the one that has 100 or have the one that has 10? Most of those employees in a blind study are going to say, give me the thing that gives me more options. Why would we not want more choice? So if you're to ask somebody something, yeah, they're going to say, yeah, I want more choice. I want to have a lot of options. But in reality, when it comes to the point of action, things change just a little bit. So the takeaway here is when you give people more choices, they become paralyzed and end up choosing nothing instead. So this is decision paralysis. That's just common. And if you ever read a lot of books talk about this, a lot of marketing books talk about this. A couple of books by Chip and Dan Heath, I think Decisive and Switch both talk about this. It's a real thing. So logically, if you increase the chances of purchase, if you reduce the number of options people have to choose from, because it's just more simple to buy from somebody. Another case study, this is a little bit more of a popular case study. So if you've heard this, I apologize. You're about to hear it again. If not, just hang tight with me. So this is the jam stand experiment, and this was performed by the same group of researchers from that Vanguard study. So the study, researchers go to a local food market, like a farmer's market type of situation, have a stand, and on one day they go in and they put out 24 different varieties of jam on that stand. They go back on another day, same spot, they only put out 6 jars of jam, just to see how do people react, how do passerbyers react. Which stand do you think got the most foot traffic? Well, the one with 24, because as I mentioned earlier, when given the option, if you're to ask somebody, what should I go to? You're going to pick the thing with more options. You're like, oh, yeah, of course, I want to see all these options. But what happened on the buying level? The table of more choices had more foot traffic, but the table that only had the 6 jars of jam instead of 24, those actually sold more product. So the takeaway within this particular case study is people are 10 times less likely to purchase a jar of jam when presented with more options. So while you think an abundance of choice is appealing, in all reality, choice overload generates the wrong results. So it's not just we can't decide what we want. There's that fear of missing out of we might make the wrong decision, and that paralyzes you even more. So talked a lot about the high level of decision paralysis, too much choice. Let's talk about this from a marketing perspective. Tactically speaking, think of the jam stand like your brand's website, for example. I'm a digital marketer, so I'm going to lean a little bit more on the digital channel side of things. Would you rather have a lot of web traffic or a lot of buyers? So when you're presenting to your boss or a board or whomever that is, what do you think is going to stand out to them? Are you trying to get just a lot of web traffic to keep those graphs moving up and to the right? Or are you trying to get a lot of buyers? Yeah, traffic may be down, but we are having a higher conversion rate. We are having more revenue. We are having more engagement. What do you think is going to stand out more? And so that's something to think about as you're making these UX decisions. So what can we apply? That less is more. Everything, everyone, all at once. It's a great movie. It is a very poor web strategy. It is something I have to fight against every day being in a huge law firm. As I mentioned before, you have a lot of different opinions. Everybody wants to show everything at once because they don't want a potential client to miss out on something or make a decision because of what we're lacking. I would argue that us having too much is going to have a more negative impact on that decision than not showing enough. So to prove that, in a way, eat my own dog food, I'll talk about something we did at Womble from a web perspective. Back in June, we finally deployed a fairly significant website project. If you were to go stalk a website later and say this all doesn't look exactly the same, you're right. We've taken web projects from a kind of like when you renovate a house, room by room. That's how we've done the website. But the most significant thing we've done is our homepage and sector and service pages, which It's quite a bit of content. So here's what we did. Womble, just a little bit of backstory, was a US and a UK firm. They combined around 2018. I may have the date wrong, but it's in that ballpark. And since that combination, they took the two firms, put them in one website, and that was that. It would happen very fast, furious. We're happy to have the thing stood up. No real significant reevaluation of where we are at since then. We had done one insights portal project that was pretty significant, which that's its own conversation of taking 30 different websites and combining them into one. But we just hadn't done much. So when we went through this reevaluation page, we took a burn it down approach. We weren't saying, okay, what do we want to keep? What features do we want to get rid of? What will we edit here? What button will we move, take off? We really took a step back and said, if we had to rebuild this site today, if we were to start this firm today, what would we do? Not what would we change, but how would we start from the ground up? And part of that decision-making process, and this is very important, is meeting with dozens of key stakeholders. We met with several different partners because they're the first line of defense for talking to clients. They have client feedback. They know how they're selling the clients, and they use the website themselves to find how they're going to staff their own teams and find thought leadership to send to prospects and whatnot. So what we did, we didn't show them the page and say, what do you want to keep? What do you like? What button do you need? All that. We asked them very fundamental questions. We said, what's the one thing you want a client to learn when they visit the page? And what's one or two things you would want them to do? So what do you want them to learn? What do you want them to do? So before the reset refresh, this is what our homepage looked like. I don't have any great screenshots. This is just what I pulled from Internet Archive. Old school rotating banner, led with insights, which for professional services is not a bad thing. And there weren't any clear calls to action. Our homepage, much more clear calls to action. We talk about who we are as a firm. We didn't do that the first time. And we lead with users finding attorneys. So at the very, very top, you see, find an attorney, find the sector service. What is your need? That's what we lead with. Here's who we are. Here's how we can help. Then we go into a little bit more of the self-serving content. Same thing with the services pages, sector and services pages. Looked very much like my old WordPress blog back in 2010 when I first started working. Had an old school WordPress feel to it. Our key contacts, leaders, the people who truly are our products, they're buried at the bottom of the page. So we brought them to the top. Again, kept function to the top. And then the meatier text heavy stuff was there for somebody who was going to stick around for a long time. So there's a funneled, prioritized way we displayed that content. So it looks a little more aesthetically pleasing. It looks a little more modern, up to date. And that's great, but UX is more than just a visual thing. It is a business decision. So what were the results? In the first 3 months, like I said, we just deployed this in the 1st of June. We had a 47% increase in conversions, 11.59 increase in attorney bio traffic, which in our world is very, very important because that's like saying, hey, I had almost a 12% increase in product pages being shown, and a 74% increase in email addresses being clicked in bios. So all of our attorneys have their own bio page, credentializing, all of that. Within those bio pages, they have their email address for people to reach out to them directly. So we don't have the normal SaaS model where you're having a contact page or asking for a demo or something like that, and you're getting routed based on geo necessarily. People have the opportunity to reach out to an attorney themselves, and we measure that, and it worked great. So front end is important for a website. But one of the things that's easy to overlook is the back of the house. You got to tidy up the back of your house for the front end to not only look good, but actually function well. I used to work at a PR agency. We did a lot of crisis comms, and the guy who ran our agency always said, PR problems are just management problems that are made public. Something bad is happening behind the scenes. Now the public is seeing that. I have a spin on that. I say UX problems are typically data or even business strategy problems that are made public. If you have a bad UX, that might be indicative of you don't have a solid business strategy in place, or you have really kind of crazy all over the place data. You don't know what you're trying to learn. You don't know what you're trying to get people to do. And so you're kind of just guessing. Cleaner data will help you have a cleaner UX. I stole this analogy from my spouse. She's given this counsel to her clients as well. So it's having a clean website, but messy infrastructure is like having a clean room because only because you crammed everything under the bed and in the closets. It looks nice on the surface, but nobody's going to be able to find anything. So why does data matter for UX? When we think of UX, you think of the front end. What's the design look like? You think about wireframes and thinking about really clean, minimalistic design. Well, why does that back end that nobody sees? Why does that matter? You make UX decisions based on what you know about your customers. Could be from a CRM perspective. There could be from a Google Analytics perspective. So one thing from our web strategy refresh that I didn't mention for Womble was navigation. We had a drop-down navigation, but we always had a problem with people couldn't find everything that we did. It was very hard to find. I went to our Google Analytics data and saw nobody really uses a drop-down. It's not a thing. Like we had very minimal interaction there. Most people found our services pages from SEO, internal site search, or something else. Leaned into that, got rid of the drop down. Now we're seeing more traffic to those services pages, more conversions, as I mentioned. And that was because I looked at our consumer data and said, what are they doing? And how can we make the information they're looking for easier to get to? Know the data you want to capture from your customers. And so from a CRM perspective, you already know what you know, but you also know what you don't know. So what are you trying to collect from customers? You can use something like progressive profiling, for example, as a way to let's capture more from our customers. What are some common things that we're missing that we might be using for business reasons, for ad targeting, whatever that is. But how can we get information in a way that's going to increase that conversion rate? So progressive profiling being something like, we already know all this. Let's only ask for the pieces of information we don't know about that person and start from there. And if you don't have a good clean data strategy, you can't do that other part. And the beauty of that is you're asking for smaller bits of information from a consumer at the onset. And so they're more likely to convert. And data helps you determine where you want to go. UX helps you get there. If you don't have an idea what you want from your customers, what you're missing, what your goals are, your UX strategy is effectively going to be the digital version of throwing spaghetti at a wall. So here's what we did at Womble. CRM work sparked joy. It took the Marie Kondo effect. That's what I called it. We went through our CRM and we eventually eliminated 90% of our data, or 90% of the fields. We were collecting tons of data because we thought we had to know everything about everybody. We weren't maintaining it. We weren't using it. So we looked at the usage of all these fields, ended up trimming about 90% of the fields in our CRM. So we probably have less raw data, quantity of data, but what we have is more actionable data. So therefore, as a result of that, our CRM has a higher adoption rate. We're able to make better informed decisions with our advertising. Email open rates are better. Click-through rates are better. Website engagement's better because we took a less is more approach. So it all works together. Knowing our business priorities with CRM helped us as a business and will help you as well make better content priority decisions with your web UX. So steps to building a user experience. Start off with good data hygiene. If the back of your house is not cleaned up, it's really hard to make that front of the house work as well. User interviews and research. It's one thing to look at the data, look at your Google Analytics data, anything you're digitally tracking user behavior, but user interviews are great as well because what they'll do is add context to the things that the digital tools aren't going to tell you. You always have to talk to people. If you don't, you're going to miss something. Take a clean slate approach. Don't try to edit where you can. If you have the opportunity, you don't need to burn it down and start over. I think there's a quote saying, before you tear down a wall, figure out what was there in the first place. I mean, definitely keep that in mind, but don't try to sand the edges. See, if I was to rebuild this today, how would I prioritize my content? Prioritize your content. Look at what's most important. What are we trying to get people to do? And then how do we get people to take one action? Then they'll take another action and draw them down a funnel. Eliminate what's unnecessary. That's what's good UX is. Find the things that aren't necessarily necessary for that customer experience and eliminate it. The less you have on there for people to consider, the more likely they are to continue engaging with you. And then clarity beats clever. So one thing I'll see from a web perspective is you might have a website that looks really cool, flashy. It's very, very clever, very out of the box. Can't really do anything with it. There are businesses and use cases where I think that's very appropriate. Most often, It's not useful. So questions, a couple questions in the chat. The data visualization can be overwhelming. Any ideas for streamlining? Uh, that is a good point. I think one thing with dashboarding, for example, we've got into exercises is you're trying to, it's so easy to turn that thing into Frankenstein's monster, right? I would say, you know, and we have this from a reporting perspective too. We have a challenge. We think of the top level. There's a lot of like subset activities that you can measure or show that what you're doing. Think of one, two, or three big things. You can, it's almost like you have like a data taxonomy of sorts. There's a lot you could show, but what activities are actually informing this top line activity? So for example, our digital reports, we used to put together like a 30-page PowerPoint. Now it's like 5. So we said, here's all these other activities we could be reporting on, talking about. The purposes of our board, end of the day, they only care about these 3 things. We care about this from an internal perspective. Start small, start with the most important things. It's going to look different for everybody, and then start to streamline. So that way, from a dashboarding perspective, you're focusing on a couple of KPIs, and then you could do something where you just stay there, or you can have a kind of a clickable thing where like, okay, click here for more, take you to another page specific to that. So we've set up dashboards like that for the data curious. They get all they want. But if you're wanting to eyeball something and get the key idea and move on, you can do that too. Another question is, are there any new ways of customers to get where we want them to go during their interaction? Any new in processes or tech? The tech's behind, honestly, you know, it, if you have an issue with getting your customers to get where you want them during their interactions, new tech's probably not going to be your solve. I think there are solutions to that. Like I mentioned, progressive profiling. If you have a good CRM or marketing automation system, that'll solve that. But think about what you want them to do first, and try to get one piece of data. So when I first learned about like progressive profiling, what I was told is, people are more likely to give one little piece of data to you at a time. So how do you get people to take little micro, I hate to say where micro does, but like little micro pieces of what you want them to do, and just do little things over time, and it's less overwhelming to them. So how do you get people to take teeny tiny actions a whole lot of times instead of asking for a whole lot at once? And I think that's the best way to get customers where you want them. It may take a little longer. It's a little less gratifying. It's a little less more nitty gritty as a marketer, but you will see more success that way. Our internal customers, employees have been our focus. Kind of the same thing for us. Any tips for measuring the success of CX for these crucial team members? It depends what you're trying to run, right? So if you're trying to run, for us, we do employee advocacy online. So we have a very specific way to measure how people are talking about our brand online. We have an advocacy platform. We use everyone's, we'll call it up. We use a social advocacy platform. We can see what people are doing, how they're talking about the brand, how are they sharing. You can score it, look at that, look at growth of users, look at growth of engagement there. A customer experience also for us from our client development team will be, we have internal tools like our CRM, for example. What is the adoption rate for our CRM? Is it down? Is it up? If it's dropping, why aren't people logging in? What are they not getting there that they're trying to get somewhere else? Is there a reason somebody has a bunch of Excel files filed on their desktop, but they refuse to import that into a CRM? They refuse to use this tool for that, right? So try to figure out what that is. That's how we measure success. We look at advocacy, we look at our own internal tools, and see what does adoption rate look like, what does engagement rate look like. And then once or twice a year, I'll kind of do a little bit of a road show, like I said, and just start talking to people on if we're seeing a dip somewhere, or we see something going well, not always identifying when things are going wrong, but hey, this is going well. Why is that? What things should we keep doing and not accidentally eliminate in the process? And that's all I have for the questions. I think it's my time. Vicki Lynn, I'll kick it back to you.
Thank you so much, Drew. What a wonderful, there was so many good tidbits in that keynote. I know you're going to hear from some folks with questions. I want to thank everyone for joining us today for this session. And this session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event. And this does officially conclude the Argyle CX UX Leadership Forum. Thank you again for joining us today and engaging in our content. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you again, Drew.
No problem. Thanks for having me.